Hello, everybody, and good evening. My name's Don Arleth, and it's time for another round of World Talks here on TVP World. And now we're continuing the topic of tariffs. President Trump has started the trade war, first with Canada, Mexico, and China, but the EU seems to be next in the crosshairs of the new American president. So what impact could it have, new tariffs here on the European Union, and how could they affect us here in Central and Eastern Europe? To discuss now, I'm joined by a senior fellow at Breugel, Zsolt Darvas. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, now looking at the situation, we have Canada, Mexico, and of course China. Trump has just announced moments ago that he is going to delay the implementation of these tariffs on those countries by about a month or so. But the European Union is certainly in the crosshairs of the new American president. Is there any truth to Donald Trump's claims that the EU treats American manufacturers of, say, automobiles or agricultural products unfair, and therefore this needs to be fixed?
There is a little truth there because EU customs duties on imports from the United States is slightly higher, but just a little bit higher than the customs duties that the United States imposes on European Union imports. But this difference is very, very small, and Trump indicated that he would impose much more significant tariffs on imports from the European Union.
Well, if we look at automobiles, it seems, to the best of my knowledge, what I've been able to determine is around 2.5% for European manufactured cars, the import duties to the United States. Here in Europe, they're 10%. So that's quite a big difference. And as far as agricultural products, I know that's a little bit more nuanced, but with meat and dairy, European Union significantly has higher tariffs on those products than the United States has on European ones. So I guess, I mean, these are just two small pieces. I mean, autos are one thing, but agricultural products are another. They're two small pieces of the broader economy. Is this something that potentially Europeans need to come closer to the Americans on?
So each country's tariff rates are determined by what they commit in the World Trade Organization process. And in the past, I mean, the US was even more liberal for trade than Europe, and US unilaterally adopted somewhat lower tariffs. As you said, for cars, it be somewhat larger difference, but that gap is still, much, much lower than what the tariff rate Donald Trump threats to impose on the European Union.
Now, concerning the EU as a whole, who do you think stands to lose the most in a tariff war amongst European member states, and who may fare better?
So clearly, the manufacturing sector would be the major victory of a tariff war between the US and Europe, and consequently all countries in Europe in which manufacturing is strong, most importantly in Germany, and also a number of Central European countries which contribute, which are suppliers to the German car industry. Also, these countries would be the major victims of a tariff war between the US and Europe.
Right, definitely Poland amongst them, as they do manufacture lots of car parts here, and of course they are used in the German supply chain. Now, let's take Poland for instance. I mean, Poland's got a diversified export structure, but Poland also, if we look at the trade deficit with the United States, it only stands at about $100 million. The EU as a whole last year, about 80 billion. So because the Polish economy is so tied into the German economy, should this be something that Poles need to worry about? The wider question of tariffs on the European Union?
I think the key word is uncertainty. We still don't know how the US-EU trade dispute will evolve. We have already seen that Trump has already postponed his measures to Mexico. With the EU, he has not yet announced what he would like to do, and most likely he would like to achieve some deals with Europe before imposing any tariff, or if he would announce a tariff, he would be still open for negotiation. So at this stage, we still don't know when Mr. Trump would like to impose his tariffs on Europe and what he would expect in exchange. But I think Mr. Trump also must have advisors who tell him that, look, imposing tariffs is not really a good idea. This will create inflation in the United States that will hurt especially poorer people, that would encourage the Federal Reserve to have a higher interest rate, which will be also bad for the US economy. So in fact, so far, Mr. Trump was much more modest imposing tariffs than he proposed during the campaign. For example, he suggested to impose a 60% tariff on China and announced only 10% last week.
Right, 25% for Canada, 25% for Mexico, and just 10% for China. We just had an earlier discussion, and actually it was pointed out that Trump had put tariffs on China before, during his last presidency, and President Biden upheld a lot of those tariffs. So in some cases, this 10% just adds on to that number. Now, concerning security here in NATO, in Europe, we've heard Donald Trump continuously say that Europeans are not spending enough, that Americans are footing the bill, and that this needs to end. Is there a NATO component in here and military spending, the president's new goal being somewhere in the neighborhoods of 5%, which in the short term will be difficult for many European countries to meet. But do you think that this is a part of the negotiation tactics and strategy of President Donald Trump?
Yes, I do think this is part of the negotiating tactic of Donald Trump. Even the United States does not spend 5% of its GDP on defense. So I think it's inconceivable to expect that the European Union countries, which are currently close to 2%, would suddenly go for 5%. But
even
indeed,
after years of deficit of only spending above 1% and far below the commitments that were made by many European countries to spend that 2%?
Yes, for many, many years, European countries spent much less on defense than what they promised to do. And the Russian attack on Ukraine was a wake-up call for many European Union countries that indeed peace is not guaranteed. They must spend much more on protecting themselves. And also all the messages coming from Washington suggesting that the US security guarantee is much weaker than we previously thought. So all these will encourage European countries to spend much more. But unfortunately, there are very limited options for that, because many countries, including Poland, also have very rather large budget deficits. At the same time, European fiscal rules require the budget deficits to be cut and also the public debt to be kept below 60% of GDP. So I'm afraid many, if not all, most European Union countries have very limited budget to increase spending on defense. So I think defense spending will go up a little bit, but certainly it might not satisfy Donald Trump's requests.
Okay, well, still no tariffs in place on the European Union as of yet. Zsolt Darvas, Senior Fellow at Breugel, thank you very much for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that concludes this round of World Talks. Thank you for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.